Fleetwood Mac, of course. Bill Clinton's campaign song, Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow, from the 77 album Rumours. Now, so many people on the Irish music scene saddened by the death of Paul Ashford yesterday. Not a name that would be terribly familiar, you know, in the context of today's music and the X Factor generation, let's call it. But people of a certain generation, particularly in the Dublin area and around the country, would have known Paul for many years of being on the circuit, as it were. He was a part of the Miami show band at one point. He was best friends with Fran O'Toole, of course, who died in the famous and tragic Miami shooting of July 31st, 1974, and he was a founder and continuing member of the great pub rock, often known as snob rock band, Step Aside, that I must say I saw many's the night in places all over Dublin in the 1980s and indeed 1990s and indeed the 2000s, and great memories we all have of Paul Ashford. And here on this radio station we played many of his songs in the past. Good morning, David. I'm deeply saddened on the news of the truly great Paul Ashford. Great memories of weekends at the Mississippi Rooms, said Paul, and we'd loads of other texts, including the last few minutes. Hi, David. Please play Paul Ashford. There's one in every town. A legend of a man, said Leonard in Limerick. Well, someone who soldiered with Paul as part of Step Aside over many years is Brendan Bonass, and he's on the line. Hello, Brenny. Good morning.
Hello, Dave.
I know that the entire music community, and for somebody like you who was effectively a member of the family, it must be an awful shock.
Well, you know, in recent years, Mark and I have really been close to Paul. You know, the rest of the band have drifted away over the years. As you can imagine, as we left our competitive stage all those years ago. But Mark and I really have become like brothers to Paul.
This is Mark Costigan.
Mark Costigan, yeah. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Mark and I have he's really our brother, and we felt like a brother. And that, as you know, involves, tearing each other's hairs out as well as being, best buddies. But nevertheless, he was a brother to us, and we're still kind of trying to come to terms with it.
When you go back to a jobbing musician, I mean, that's what Paul Ashford was, a jobbing musician.
Very much so.
You know, I looked up some photographs on the web of him and looking up the news yesterday. A young fella playing with the Miami show band in his very early 20s, out there doing his thing. He made a life of it. But 30 years ago, he's involved in extraordinary... Well, 40 years ago, he's involved in a band that then becomes the centre of this extraordinary incident when he had just left it. From the time he left school, this guy was on the road.
Well, it's stunning, actually. The famous headline from one of the evening papers was... Paul Ashford, bass player with Miami, earns more than a TD. And there's a picture of him with his brand new Triumph 2000. A young guy, he must have been only 20 or 21, and he was earning more than a TD, so that was quite a story at the time.
He had this other famous on-off relationship, and I use that in the male sense, with Phil Lynott. They were good pals. Lynott, of course, whose anniversary occurred last week, they were good pals, but Lynott said, you're not so much into the art, man, you're into the bread, you're into making the money.
And I think that there was a bit of that surrounding the show band era, because the difference between Phil Lynott and his band and the Miami Showmen, for example, in the show band era, was that show bands went for regular salaries. They got paid regularly every night where they went, whereas the concept bands, if you like, really took their chances, but also the stakes were much higher in the end.
I know that a lot of our listeners who are of, I said it, the younger generation, God bless me for actually being able to say that, wouldn't remember an awful lot about the Miami show band. But back to those show band days, and Paul Ashford was, a jobbing part of that. He wasn't the front man. He wasn't Dickie Rock. They were the kind of U2 of their day, really, weren't they?
Yes, because...
Is that stretching it, is it?
Well, it's not stretching it locally, because really they filled almost every ballroom they ever went to, and they constantly went around Ireland to different ballrooms, filling them everywhere, as I said, everywhere they went. So they were very, very big, no question about it.
When you think about, your career on the road with bands like Step Aside,
yeah,
what was all that like? I mean, is it? I know, again, it's not like being U2, but there was this kind of 1970s, 1980s rock and roll lifestyle. Get out there, give it a lash. I mean, did you have a wild time? Did Paul Ashford have that sort of wild time?
Well, I mean, it was hard work. We started off. Actually, we were probably one of the first pub box style bands in Ireland. But unfortunately, we limited ourselves to Dublin and Leinster in the beginning, which kind of shut off a lot of opportunities to us. But we did fill halls here and fill clubs big time here in Dublin. at the time. Yes, it was pretty wild in terms of the fact that we had to travel all the time. We had to go to England, and we went to Spain, and we were trying to do this concept band thing as opposed to the show band thing. That we wrote all the songs and we recorded our own songs, and that was something different at the time. In fact, I think we were probably one of the first rock bands in Ireland to write our entire album. And to this day, people are still telling us they love to hear them.
In later years, Paul Ashford had become somebody who'd, I wouldn't say go out and play with any band, but he was a great man for picking it up and picking up the bass and getting out there. And if somebody was having a gig, he'd get up and he'd play, and he'd had a band of his own, and he was involved with other bands. So, he truly lived it to the full. I
can tell you that he, this is going to sound such a cliche, but he provided so much joy and pleasure to people all over Ireland. He played almost every opportunity that was offered him. He wanted to play. And he was a terrific frontman, terrific entertainer. And you could always, the moment Paul got on the stage, you could step back and you know that he'd do all the work. He was so good.
Okay, we have fond memories of Paul Ashford. Brenny, to you and the other guys in the band, I know that you're feeling the hurt, to use the phrase, and I know that there's a wider family out there, Paul Ashford supporters and friends, who will be very, very saddened on his premature demise. But to all of you, our sympathies, and his memory, of course, lives on in your music.
Thank you very much, Dave.
Thank you indeed.
Thank you. Bye.
I
our little tribute to Paul Ashford, Step Aside, and Every Inch of You drives me mad. Just to give away our fabulous hamper full of these neo